look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg. Let's just dig right in, Tony. What's our bad idea this week?
We're going to be talking about the Fistula Fad during the late 1600s in France.
What, dude? I'm a little bit afraid to ask, but what is a fistula?
A fistula is something that develops in the body whenever you pretty much make an alternative canal for waste, urine, blood, anything like that. So,
I was right to be afraid. I regret everything.
Yeah, just go Google it real quick.
No, I'm good. I'm just gonna. I'm gonna sit here not imagining that, Tony.
Siri, show me anal fistulas. There you go. Everybody, you should be very thankful for that. But an anal fistula specifically is where in the colon a weird channel develops and goes into usually around the middle of a butt cheek or something like that. This is specifically about the King of France, Louis XIV, who is probably best known to Americans because of his film Man in the Iron Mask. I saw the movie when I was 11 and never looked back, so before doing research for this, I knew even less than that. I didn't even know that was Louis XIV.
Louis XIV didn't make that movie. That movie is nominally about Louis XIV.
Yeah, this was
I want
an
to be
Alexander
clear there.
Dumas book with some random director that I don't know off the top of my head.
Had Leo in it, though.
Yeah. It's like, all I know about that movie is it's Leo in a metal mask, and he was some relation to the king, probably a twin brother, something like that. And we aren't here to talk about teen heartthrobs. We're here to talk about the Sun King, Louis XIV, and his butt. Or rather, weird anomalies in the plumbing near the butt.
Okay. I'm okay.
Unfortunately, just as it is now, there isn't a Roomba that automates intestinal maintenance. There's always just problems coming up back there, and sometimes they're much worse than others. As we've talked about in length, before I even got to the notes, I was about to talk about fistulas here, but we had to just dive into it before. King Louis had a lot of these different types of issues. He had gout, he had a lot of other intestinal distress, migraines, headaches, diabetes, suppurating parotosis, which is inflammation of the tissue around the bones, which is severely painful, boils, fainting spells, hot flashes, dental abscesses, and more. And this is all really weird for us to know about anyone from the 1600s, because most of the time, like, if it's not military or if it's not a very significant event, you're not going to have any information. But Louis XIV had his health very, very closely monitored, and we have all the information there on a daily basis.
Another good reason to be thankful to live in the 21st century.
Yeah.
If you think you have it bad, imagine how much worse King Louis XIV had it. The literal, most powerful man in the world at the time had all of that stuff that Tony just said. And anal fistulas.
Yeah, and the only thing they're going to be able to do medicine-wise is be like, well, your humors are out of balance, among other things. Actually, physicians started to do some things that weren't just humor-related at this time, but it's still the 1600s, and you're not going to get that great of medical care. I always wonder about this, because king's blood is supposed to be divine. It's almost like that whole, inbreeding thing leads to problems.
Or he lived too rich of a lifestyle, and that had some issues, because he's the king and he can.
Yeah, whenever you're the king, you have a lot of good wine and a lot of rich foods. It allows you to kind of get into a very opulent state as opposed to most people, especially when you're a well-regarded king. A fistula is an alternative channel for feces to run through. It is caused usually by an abscess that heals and leaves a cavity. As feces are passed, it tears through the lining, and for lack of a better term, tears you a new butthole. And the reason why I keep reiterating this is because this is going to be the first time in a very, very long time that people have attempted surgery of this sort. Because a fistula cannot heal just on its own. It always ends up healing the outside edges instead of starting healing in the middle and moving outward. And this means that you just have a pocket that just keeps on forming with pus and everything else. Sometimes it just becomes like a blank channel because the inside will heal enough.
So it heals itself closed so that there's just, poop stuck inside?
There's more often the
channel?
bacteria and probably some feces in there, yes.
This is not I hope that you're not taking this as a negative feedback, Tony, on your topic of episode. I'm just dealing with with all of that. It's
it's a lot.
I know it's a real thing.
It's hard to pass, you know.
Now that's your fault, Tony. That one's on you.
Now, today, having a fistula isn't really a problem. Like, it's still a surgery, but it's very much a lot easier, partially because of anesthetics, partially because we know what we're doing, partially because we understand germ theory. But if you're living in the era before the Declaration of Independence, your nasty butt is going to have a bad time. This started in 1685 when King Louis developed just a little bit of swelling. A month later, the swelling became an abscess. And an abscess, if you're wondering, is basically just a swollen area filled with pus. These can range wildly. Go to Dr. Pimple Popper and you'll see what I mean. It could range from like little zits to these skin infections to softball-sized volcanoes filled with cottage cheese magma. It's rough. Don't go there if you have a weak stomach.
Holy cow, you're gonna have to put a trigger warning on this episode, Tony. I'm actually fine with the abscess pimple popper stuff, but you are firing a wide spread of nastiness.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm not into the whole like pimple popping thing. It's just not my deal. Like, I know some of our patrons are for a fact, so I'm sure they'll enjoy this episode, but really, I don't get the ASMR tingles from watching pimple popping. It's just not my thing. Also, booty issues aren't really a bad idea. It's just something that happens. What happens after this story is a bad idea. The doctors believed that it was caused by horseback riding, which Louis was wont to do. Back in the day, they thought there were a lot of other things that could cause these, such as like living a bad lifestyle, sinful thoughts, feather cushions, and the act of copulation. Pretty much any of those would be a way to get this. Normally, they would just try poultices and enemas. These were some of the only medicines that actually worked at the time. Like, a poultice is basically a type of balm that you would put over a wound. And Louis XIV absolutely loved his enemas. It is said that he had well over 2,000 of them in the course of his lifetime.
I'm not going to judge this. I mean, everything else about the man was messed up. You know, at this point, why not?
He used to have enemas while holding court. While people would be pitching ideas to him or telling him the status of what was going on in his country, or even just trying to gain his favor at being friendly, he would still be having an enema while this was happening. And other people thought that they would be able to impress him, so young ladies would come into the court and have an enema administered while they were speaking with him.
This has got to be a power move. Or at the very least, it turns into a power move. You know you're the most powerful man in the world when you can just be having an office talk and like watching somebody's PowerPoint while you're having an enema administered.
This was an alpha move that Lyndon Johnson used to pull all the time. Like, he'd have a bunch of media people in while he's just taking a dump. Or he'll walk up to them while they're on the White House lawn and take a leak right in front of them. He just never was afraid to show off his endowment or any sort of other thing. It was definitely a power move on his part, though.
That was a fun side fact. He didn't have a fistula too, did he?
I don't know if he had a fistula. It wouldn't surprise me, though. And of course, having enemas, poultices, and all the other treatments of the time didn't work, so he needed a solution. Bathing at the time was considered immoral, and it was mostly because nudity was involved, and people were severely prudish at this time. And so Louis XIV...
You cannot say that! You cannot say that right after he had, like, warm water shoved up his butt while people were talking to him and then saying, like, no, he was too moral to take off his clothes to bathe.
Yeah, but
those two things do not fit together.
Procedure. It's different, though, because it's a medical thing.
Okay.
Yeah, like that's...
I'm not buying into this, Tony, but I'll let you go on. I just want to say Rihanna had the best single of the year, whatever. I don't know how to quote that meme, but dagnabbit.
Also, he really didn't like baths. He was said to have had 2 baths over the course of his entire lifetime. So just everything about this guy must have been stank. Like, I'm sure he wiped occasionally, like just give yourself like a sponge bath like your family's been doing with that 7th generation towel. But it's just... like, I don't understand. I have a hard time if I don't have a shower by noon. I start feeling crusty.
There is nothing there I want to respond to.
Now, the only people that were really doing any sort of surgery at the time were actually barbers. And barbers were considered to be doing surgery because they actually cut the hair, because it was all considered part of the body. Doctors thought that it was wrong to actually go inside of the body. They mostly tried to administer things, make people comfortable when they were sick, but they weren't very hands-on as far as like internal medicine and removing something. So what he did is he commissioned a barber named Charles-François Félix to do all the cutting here.
Is this somebody he knows ahead of time? Is this somebody who's like really good at cutting hair? How does Felix get this job?
Well, I know he was a notorious barber at the time. Like, he was really good at pulling teeth and doing other, like, minor surgical stuff. So I think it was just kind of a word-of-mouth thing, and they were like, this is going to be the guy.
That's something to have on your headstone. I gotta say, your dad is like, he was a notorious barber. I get what you're saying, because it was sort of like, well, you know, those barbers. I don't know about them. They do know how to cut people open, though. It's ungodly, but...
I mean, if you're pulling teeth and you're doing all these other things, you are doing more than some of the doctors at the time would be willing to do. Felix knew that this was a very potentially deadly situation, because if you end up killing the king because of a bad surgery, they are going after your head. They might even go after your family's head. So he said that he would do it if he could have 6 months and a stack of people to work on. He didn't want to work on cadavers. He didn't want to work on animals. He wanted the real thing.
And he would have experience with this, too. He's probably had some surgeries go bad if he's been cutting people open in... What year is this again? 16-something?
1680s.
Doesn't know about germs. Might be cleaning his tools before the operation, Tony. Maybe. But, yeah. That's,
even if he's cleaning the tools, he's probably not sanitizing the tools. Like, it's probably got, like, the blood taken off of them, but that doesn't mean that the bacteria and everything else didn't survive. I doubt he was boiling his tools between operations.
I wonder if they had that weird blue goop that barbers have now.
If that's been around for a while. Isn't it just like Listerine or something?
It's something like that. If it's Listerine, they definitely didn't have it, because Lister didn't come around until way later. But.
Yeah, that was late 1800s for Lister into the early 1900s. I think it might have actually just been 1900s. I would have to go look that up. I know we've talked about Lister on here before.
I doubt it, Tony. I know this is a sidetrack we don't need to go down. The point is, this man would definitely be familiar with the potential of things going bad. Even if he's not into germ theory, he's probably accidentally nicked an artery somewhere, someplace, you know, had somebody bleed out on the table.
Yeah,
if he's
someone somewhere has died in his care. And that's why he knows that he needs a lot of practice with this. And he was given 75 men from prisons and a few peasants that had offended the king. None of their derriers had fistulas, but he needed to practice, so by God, he was going to tear them a new hole, and kill many of them in the process.
Oh no.
With each surgery, he honed his craft and made new tools to help with this. One of these is a really cool, sickle-looking style blade, which I believe is actually called, like, the royal scalpel. The other looks like a medieval speculum that is meant to give us the wide view of King Louis, and that just looks really rusty and gross, but that's probably because it's just old. I'm sure it just looked like black metal back then.
Oh boy, it's gonna keep it together.
After a few months of practice, King Louis presented the royal ass. It was 1686, and the king had his mistress, his confessor, his son, a team of doctors who would not aid but would rather watch, and his minister of state on hand for the surgery.
Now, you said this guy has killed some people coming up to this point. How many, or do we know that number?
They did not give a specific number. I just know that a few had died of infection.
Well, that's to be expected. If it's only a few, that's actually really impressive. I gotta say, if he's cut 75 people open in 1680 with no germ theory, no sanitation as we know it, he must be doing something a little bit right to have only killed like 10 or less.
Yeah, and he's a careful guy. It's like he wasn't going to take anything lightly with this. He's genuinely trying to get better at his craft. Like, the only time I saw a number, somebody said 15, but I'm not 100% sure on that. The sources on this are a bit older, and they were more focused on Louis than they were on Charles-François Félix.
Okay, that's understandable, but disappointing.
After 3 hours of very intense surgery, Charles-François would end up closing up the hole, and it started to heal immediately. Like, within a few days, he was feeling better. Within a few months, Louis was riding a horse again. Everything was fully healed from this fistula, and it was 100%, like, cleared up. Like, he would never have this problem again. That's how good Felix did with his job here. And as a reward...
My man.
As a reward, he would be given an estate, many honors, a boatload of cash, and he immediately retired from surgery at that moment.
He's like, I'm out. I'm on top, undefeated. No, don't ask about those peasants.
Yeah, like, I do not blame him at all for that either. It's like, if you go out, you finish on the king, you end up making more money than probably any single surgery has ever gotten a person in the history of the world. Just retire right then. Don't risk your luck. Don't accidentally kill any other people. Maybe be a consultant and tell some other barbers what you did. Sell your parts and things like that. But otherwise, this is the time to retire. This is winning the Super Bowl and getting out the game.
Yeah, don't do that Tom Brady thing and win 5 more. I have a question though about this surgery. What is it? Is there any anesthetic of any kind going on at this point?
Whenever I was reading it, they didn't specify exactly what he was on. It might have been some sort of opium thing. It might have been alcohol. But I know they didn't have good anesthetics at the time.
So he wasn't knocked out, but he may have been kind of high.
He was awake talking to his mistress and so on while that was going on. Now, the fallout from this is actually interesting because it made doctors start to consider surgery again. It was such a high-profile thing. The main reason they didn't do surgery had a lot of justifications, but mostly people would die from infections. If you want to see more about that, see our Ignaz Semmelweis episode, and you'll see exactly how bad that got sometimes. But Louis XV, the man who followed Louis XIV, would actually open an institute for surgery, helping elevate the medical world in France, and they quickly became known for having some of the best surgeons in the world. So this surgery itself, once again, none of these are the bad ideas. The bad idea is coming up here soon. Might have been a bad idea to have him operate on prisoners and so on, but the really bad stuff is coming in a minute. But it's weird how one surgery can actually change the entire landscape of medicine, and this did that.
You know, I actually know a little bit about this story, so I know where you're going, but I do want to double down on this really important point that the advancement of science is not unencumbered by what people think is cool and not cool.
Yeah.
Like, we have... Now, this is debatable, right? Because you can't go back and run the timeline without this surgery happening, but it is arguable that some of the advancements of surgery we have today are available because everybody looks at this surgery and says, wow, that's neat. Let's try that for a while. See what it does.
It's like new techniques come out of things go in style, things go out of style, and it's not always the best possible way of doing things. Sometimes it's just what's easiest. And it's really weird how that can affect it, just like the perception of a surgery. Now, this is where the real bad idea begins. People in Paris wanted to have an anal fistula so they could have the same surgery done to them as what the king had. Everything Louis did was in vogue. People wanted to dress like him, people wanted to act like him, and whenever he got his butt repaired, they wanted to have that too. They wanted to have the story, they wanted to do this, and so some of them kept it simple. They would just put a bandage around their, between their leg and around the bottom, and you could tell, what they were trying to say. They were like, oh yeah, it was just, it's in commemoration of Louis. We're glad that he survived. But some of these people went further and actually got themselves operated on by barbers so that they could have a fistula surgery. And it was called the Le Royal.
Man, I cannot even with this episode today, Tony.
It's like some people went pretty far with just the bandages over their clothes because they would actually put feces or blood on it to make it look authentic. But why would you go so far as to actually put a hole in you? I say as I know tons of people that put holes in their faces for jewelry's sake. But at least that has a function for prettiness. Yeah,
that's... I would argue that's different, Tony, but I can't get it out of my head now. You said it had a name, and I know that there were barber shops in this era. There had to be, who had a sign up in the window saying, come on in and get your Le Royale.
And now if you go to McDonald's in France, you can get your Le Royale with cheese.
Yes, I also thought of that.
There's not even a lot more to say about this other than just being completely flabbergasted that a fistula surgery would become a fad. I understand that people are getting lap band surgeries now as sort of a fad, even if they don't fully need them. But that's, once again, a health-related thing that actually changes. This is elective surgery with no purpose, and it's insane to me.
You know, it occurs to me this might be, the earliest example of what you might call plastic surgery. It's surgery with no purpose. It's just to make you look better. subjectively to the times, obviously, but still, these people are saying, hey, but it's not even because plastic surgery of the day, you don't want people to know that you had it. This was a surgery where the very fact that you had the surgery was the attractive thing to say, hey, look at, I've got this cool surgery.
And I guess like there have been enhancement surgeries like that are a bit more primitive, like the rings on tribes in Africa where they lengthen the neck, or like foot binding in Asia. Like there's things that have been going on for a long time.
But none of those things initially had a function. Like I don't think anybody at one point in Africa had really big ears. Maybe they did, Tony. I mean, I don't want to extrapolate exactly where all that got started. But it doesn't seem like those types of things have a specific, oh, we're trying to look like this guy and he's messed up, so we're going to make ourselves look messed up.
Especially when it's something that nobody would want to talk about, like an extra like hole in your butt.
Yes, it's such a weird paradox, because on the one hand you've told me this is such a prudish era that they will not take their clothes off to take a bath, which I actually kind of want a citation on. I think that it depends on where you are.
Well, there were also
specifically in this time period.
There were a lot of different reasons for like the not taking a bath thing. Like there were some people that thought that having that layer of grime protected you from germs, not realizing that it's basically making you a breeding ground. There were about like 20 different reasons why baths weren't a big part of things.
But on the other hand, you have Louis XIV having his butt surgery and also like inviting his mistress to be there. Like, we're not talking about a man who's horribly concerned about what people think about him.
No, he's the trendsetter.
And yes, it seems like that I cannot wrap my head around this. I'm not saying I don't want to step out too far and say that people today are not like this. We are so much better than this, because obviously people then are like people today, but I am not able to cast myself back into the era where Louis was so well loved and so powerful that you would literally cut your butt open so that you could be like him.
Yeah. And especially because it's just like you're going to drive a sickle-shaped thing from your butt into like your intestinal wall. It's just too much. I have one last thing to cover on this, which I found rather entertaining. And these two stories are oddly linked in that
all right,
there was once a man named Handel that is a composer that you've probably heard of. And I guarantee most of you have actually heard the song that I'm talking about. There was a prayer going around that was basically hoping that King Louis's health would recover because he was well loved by his people, and there was kind of a melody that went with it. While Handel was in France, he decided he was going to rip this off, and he went back to his home in London and composed a song that would later become God Save the Queen. So, the British national anthem is actually adapted from a song that is about Louis XIV's butt. And there's something wonderful about that to me.
It's a good song, to be fair.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
I did not realize it was stolen, Tony. Like, that's almost more scandalous than the butt thing. The fact that he's like, well, I'll repurpose this French thing for, like, the most nationalistic English song you could possibly sing.
Yeah, especially because he was German, so he's a German stealing a French song to make the British national anthem.
Although I recently learned the history of our national anthem, and maybe that should be a bad idea, Tony.
Maybe. I don't know anything about it, so I would definitely listen to that.
Let's just say it was not intended to be sung by the common people, and to have a song that everybody gets together and sings to sort of talk about how patriotic they are, that it was originally intended to show off how great of a tenor you could be. Let's calm down there, guys. That's way off topic, Tony.
Yeah, but we've had fun with our off-topic aspects of this episode. If you guys have bad ideas, yes, I would love it if you sent them to badideashow@gmail.com. And if you could, please tell one friend about this. Please leave a review on iTunes. And we would really appreciate that, because that is the fastest way to get these podcasts to grow. It helps us with the algorithm, or just having that word of mouth stuff. It's awesome. So thank you guys very much for listening. We'll be back next week with more bad ideas.
And before we finally close out, I want to point out that we are now doing more of a video component to these podcasts. So if you are listening on audio and you would like to see our faces, and at least the ones I'm editing, I'm putting in little pictures of things that we're talking about and video clips that are relevant. So if you are interested in seeing a little bit more of that kind of thing, you can head over to our YouTube Bad Ideas channel.
Yep, and that is youtube.com/badideas.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.